It was a cold and rainy night in São Paulo, the kind of night when the streets seemed deserted, except for the steady rhythm of buses hissing at stops along Avenida Itaquera. At a lonely bus shelter, just past midnight in 1993, a driver spotted something strange. A cardboard box, dampened by the rain, left on the bench. At first he thought it was trash, but when he leaned closer, he heard it. The faint cry of a newborn baby. Wrapped in a thin blanket, with a small string of blue beads tied around his tiny wrist, the baby was shivering but alive. The driver called for help, and within minutes, neighbors gathered, whispering, shocked at what they saw. The newspapers the next morning reported the scene. Baby abandoned at bus stop in the East Zone. That baby would be named Miguel. For the first years of his life, Miguel lived in a crowded children's shelter, surrounded by dozens of other kids who, like him, had stories no one wanted to tell. Caregivers tried their best, but Miguel always felt different, marked by that article, which he would keep for years folded in a plastic sleeve. At the age of 6, his life changed when he was adopted by a humble but loving couple from Itaquera. They gave him a home, a school, a routine. Yet even in the warmth of that family, Miguel carried an unshakable question. Why was I left there? Growing up, Miguel became quiet, observant. He excelled in computers and eventually worked as an IT technician. Colleagues liked him, but few knew how much of his nights were spent scrolling through online forums searching for anyone who might have answers. Sometimes he would stare at the tiny necklace of blue beads, the only thing left from that night, and wonder if someone, somewhere, had the other half. Over the years, Miguel made small attempts to trace his past. He went back to the children's shelter where he once lived, only to find old files missing. He checked with local cartorios, but no one could tell him who his biological parents were. On social media, he posted photos of the article clipping, writing, "Does anyone remember a baby left at a bus stop in São Paulo in 1993? The posts received a few shares, a handful of comments, but never led to anything solid. Still, the thought never left him. Every birthday, every holiday, even at moments when life seemed stable, a part of him remained incomplete. Who left him there? Was it a mother who had no choice or someone who simply didn't care? At 32, Miguel found himself standing once again at that same bus stop. It hadn't changed much, same cracked concrete, same rusted bench, though the city around it had grown noisier and brighter. He stood there at midnight as the rain began to fall, imagining the night he had been left behind. He whispered into the darkness, "Why me?" The silence gave no answer. But Miguel didn't know that fate was already moving toward him. In a few days, a phone would ring with a voice that would change everything he thought he knew about his past. What would you do if a single phone call revealed a secret about your entire life? Let me know in the comments below. The night at the bus stop had stirred something inside Miguel. For years, his search had been half-hearted, but now, standing where it all began, he realized he could not keep living with unanswered questions. The very next day, he sat down at his small desk, opened his laptop, and started writing a plan. If no one was going to hand him answers, he would dig for them himself. The first step was records. Miguel spent hours between dusty archives, municipal offices, and church registries. Most of the papers from 1993 were incomplete, misfiled, or had simply vanished. But then, at the orphanage where he had lived as a toddler, an elderly former caretaker recognized him instantly. "You were the quiet one," she said with a smile, "always holding that necklace." She couldn't give him names, but she remembered whispers. A very young woman, maybe a teenager. Someone who seemed lost. She came crying, asking if the baby was safe, but she never returned. That fragment of memory was enough to keep Miguel moving. He began visiting the same bus stop at different hours, as if the concrete and the shadows could somehow answer him. And one evening, standing under the flickering light, a stranger approached. A woman in her 70s clutching groceries paused and studied him. "You remind me of someone," she murmured. Back then, there was a rumor. A girl from the Bras neighborhood, maybe 16, who got into trouble. People said she vanished around that time. The old woman shook her head and walked away, but the idea stuck with Miguel. He grew bolder. He called into a local community radio station that had an open mic hour. On air, With a trembling voice, he told his story. I was abandoned as a baby in 1993. If anyone remembers anything, if you know a young girl who disappeared, please, reach out. The host, touched, gave him extra minutes. The next morning, Miguel's inbox was flooded. Most were words of encouragement. Don't give up. I'll pray for you. But among them were two messages that felt different. One said, my aunt remembers something about that time. Call me. Another simply read, check records in Minas. A family line matches your name. Curiosity burning, Miguel decided to take the leap. He registered his DNA with a volunteer database, one used for family matching. Weeks later, a notification arrived. A distant match, possibly a third cousin from a small town in Minas Gerais. It wasn't much, but it was more than he had ever had before. Miguel couldn't stop smiling that night. For the first time, the search wasn't just shadows and rumors, it had a path, however faint. He pictured an invisible thread connecting him to someone somewhere, maybe even to a whole family he had never known. Packing a small bag, he took a bus to Minas, determined to see where this thread might lead. What he found would not be clarity, not yet, but fragments of a story that had been buried for 3 decades, pieces that, once assembled, would change his entire life. But before he could face that, he had to confront something far more painful, that some people didn't want the truth uncovered. The bus ride to Minas Gerais was long, winding through dark highways and sleepy towns. Miguel pressed his forehead against the window, watching the rain blur the distant lights. Somewhere beyond those hills, he thought, there might be people who shared his blood. The idea filled him with equal parts hope and dread. When he arrived in the town of Lambari, he was greeted by its quiet streets and colonial-style houses. With the DNA database contact in hand, Miguel knocked on the door of a modest yellow home. An older couple opened it, cautious but curious. You must be Miguel, the man said slowly. We saw your name in the DNA match. We think we might be related, though distantly. Inside, they showed him a family tree sketched in pencil, names crossing generations. At one branch, a story emerged. A teenage girl named Rosa, who had disappeared from the family in 1993. Rosa had been just 17 when she left home after a complicated situation with a man from São Paulo. Nobody had seen her again. Miguel felt his chest tighten. Could Rosa be his mother? The relatives spoke with hesitation, their eyes darting at each other. There are things we don't talk about, the woman admitted. She left, and shame followed. People said she got pregnant. Others said worse. We don't know. The vagueness frustrated Miguel, but he understood the silence. Shame was heavy, especially in small towns where secrets could haunt families for decades. Still, every sentence seemed to confirm that he was close, too close to turn back. He stayed 2 more days, walking the narrow streets, asking discreet questions. Some neighbors remembered Rosa as a cheerful teenager with long black hair who loved to sing. Others recalled seeing her board a bus to São Paulo one rainy night. After that, nothing. It was as if she had been swallowed by the city. On his last night in Lambari, Miguel sat alone at a small square, listening to the fountain and the sound of crickets. He was overwhelmed, both closer than ever to the truth and still painfully far from it. When he returned to São Paulo, exhaustion weighed on him. His mind replayed the fragments: a young mother, a forbidden love, a child left behind. He wanted answers, but every wall he pushed against seemed to resist. One evening, as he sat at his desk, staring at the old newspaper clipping, his phone rang. The number was unknown. He froze. Hello? Silence. Then a breath. Miguel's heart pounded. Who is this? The call ended. He tried calling back, but there was no answer. For days he replayed that moment, wondering if it had been a mistake, or something more. Each time his phone buzzed, his pulse raced. Then, a week later, the phone rang again. This time, the voice on the other side spoke. A woman, trembling. Miguel, I think I'm your mother. The words struck him like thunder. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Everything he had imagined, all the years of wondering, now crystallized into a single voice, fragile and filled with regret. But could he trust it? Miguel gripped the phone, his throat dry. For a moment he wondered if this was some kind of cruel prank. But the woman's voice was trembling, cracking under the weight of words she had waited 3 decades to say. "My name is Elisa," she whispered. "Back then, I was too young. I was scared, and I never forgave myself." Miguel couldn't speak at first. His entire life had been defined by silence, by unanswered questions, and now the answers were speaking directly into his ear. He managed a whisper, "How do I know this is real?" Elisa hesitated, then said, "The night I left you, I tied a bracelet of blue beads on your wrist. I still keep the other one. I've kept it for 32 years. Miguel's eyes darted to the small necklace on his desk. The beads. The one thing he had carried all his life. His hand trembled as he touched it. He wanted to scream, to cry, to demand why. But all that came out was, "Why did you do it?" Elisa broke down. Between sobs, she told him about her past. At 16, she had fallen in love with an older man, a musician from Mogi das Cruzes. When she discovered she was pregnant, her family reacted with fury. Her father was violent, her mother silent. With no support, Elisa was pressured into hiding the pregnancy. She was taken to São Paulo by a neighbor who promised to help. On the night Miguel was born, the neighbor insisted the baby could not stay. Just for one night, she had said, urging Elisa to leave him at a bus stop where someone would surely find him. Elisa remembered placing him in the cardboard box, the rain soaking her clothes, her heart shattering as she kissed him goodbye. But that one night turned into forever. "I thought I'd go back the next morning," Elisa cried, "but I was too broken. I was told you had probably been taken away, that it was too late. I was a coward, Miguel. I let shame silence me. I let fear decide for me." Miguel sat in stunned silence, anger and compassion warring inside him. He had dreamed of this moment countless times, and now that it was real, it felt heavier than anything he had imagined. "Do you know who my father is?" he finally asked. Elisa hesitated again. "It might not be the man I thought. The musician, yes, I believed he was the father. But there was another man, someone I never told anyone about. You might not be his child. I don't know, Miguel. I was so young, so lost." The words struck him like a blow. Not only had he been abandoned, but now the question of his paternity was tangled in confusion and shame. Still, Miguel asked to meet her. After all these years, hearing wasn't enough. He needed to see her, to look into her eyes and decide for himself. Elisa agreed, but her voice cracked again as she said, "I don't know if you'll forgive me. I don't know if I deserve it." Miguel didn't answer. He wasn't sure either. But a meeting was set. And as the day drew near, Miguel's heart pounded with conflicting emotions: rage, sorrow, hope, and fear. Would seeing her bring closure or reopen wounds he didn't even know were still bleeding? The meeting place was simple, a small community hall in Pena, borrowed from a local church. Miguel arrived early, his palms sweating, the blue bead necklace clutched tightly in his hand. He sat at a plastic table, the hum of fluorescent lights above him, every second dragging like an eternity. Then the door creaked open. Elisa stepped in. Her hair, once black, was now streaked with silver. Her hands shook as she clutched a small cloth pouch. When their eyes met, Miguel felt his chest tighten as if 32 years of absence had suddenly condensed into this single instant. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Elisa reached into the pouch and carefully pulled out a necklace. Identical blue beads, faded with time. She placed it on the table between them. "I never let it go," she whispered. "Not a single day." Miguel's eyes blurred with tears. The proof was there, tangible, undeniable. Still, his voice cracked when he asked, "Why didn't you come for me?" Elisa broke down. "Because every time I thought of you, the shame consumed me. I thought you'd hate me. I thought you'd have a better life without me. I was wrong. I was so wrong." They sat there for hours, unraveling the threads of a story hidden for decades. Elisa told him about her years of silence, the nights she woke from nightmares, the moments she almost confessed but couldn't. She admitted she had tried once to write him a letter, but tore it apart before mailing it. Still, one truth remained unresolved. Who was Miguel's father? To face it, they took a DNA test. Weeks later, the result arrived. The musician from Mogi das Cruzes was indeed his biological father. He had never known of Miguel's existence. When contacted, the man, now working in a modest bar, was stunned. At first, he resisted, but after the test confirmed it, he agreed to meet Miguel. Their first conversation was awkward, filled with silences heavier than words. Yet Miguel noticed the same dark eyes, the same arch of the eyebrows. For the first time, he could trace his features to someone. But it was not the father's presence that brought Miguel the greatest peace. It was his grandmother. Elisa's mother, now frail and ill, insisted on meeting him. When she saw Miguel, tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks. She confessed she had written letters to him over the years, letters she never sent out of fear of judgment. She begged for forgiveness, holding his hand tightly as if afraid to lose him again. That day, Miguel realized he hadn't just found one person. He had uncovered an entire family he never knew existed. Cousins, uncles, stories, traditions. A whole web of connections had been waiting for him, silenced by 32 years of fear. Weeks later, Miguel returned to the bus stop where it all began. But this time, he wasn't alone. Elisa stood beside him. Together they placed a bouquet of white lilies on the bench where he had once been left in the rain. Miguel took a deep breath. The pain was still there. It would always be there. But it no longer defined him. Family, he said softly, isn't about perfection. It's about who chooses to stay. Elisa squeezed his hand. For the first time in his life, Miguel felt whole. And as they walked away, he knew the story that began with abandonment now ended with forgiveness. And a new beginning. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if a single phone call revealed the truth about your past?